What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to the channel. So it's been about a month since my last video. I hit like pretty peak exhaustion and I had to take a break from YouTube, but I am back with the video that I promised to drop at the end of October. Now I'm probably gonna end up dropping it like mid November, but I had read several classic horror manga series, and all of these have one thing in common, and that is that they are from the Smudge imprint. So these are the first 5 series released through Smudge. There's a sixth one on the way, sixth and seventh one on the way, I think, if I'm not mistaken. But I read all 5 of these, and I hope that you're all still excited to talk about some classic horror manga series. So yeah, I've been reading classic horror manga. I hope that you enjoy our time together. So right off the bat, we've got UFO Mushroom Invasion, and this is written and drawn by Shirakawa Marina. So this has like a through line that follows this kid named Aoki and his teacher Sada Sensei. So they see I guess like a UFO crash, like this like what's that one that's going on right now, that 3-1 Atlas or I don't know what's going on with that. Like I vaguely, kind of paid attention to it. Like I'm not really like paying that close of attention to it. But pretty much like it kind of reminds me of like the X-Files or whatever. Like there's a crash and there's an episode of the X-Files where Mulder goes to like this Area 51 sort of a base, and they like wipe his memories of having seen this plane crash. It's like one of the first episodes, if not the first episode. But that's kind of what this reminded me of, where this kid, Aoki, and his teacher, Sada Sensei, see this UFO crash, and they go to investigate. And when they go to investigate, there's like these CDC, like masked, pretty much full gear, full radioactive, sort of gear on. They take them away, to this laboratory or whatever to check them out and make sure that they're not, I guess, infected. And it kind of becomes this whole thing where a lot of different people get involved, because of the crash and then the ensuing chaos from the crash. People start to become like mushroom people, kind of like you see on this cover here. And it starts to become a thing where like people throughout Tokyo start to turn into like mushroom people. But at the same time, like you see on the TV in the manga that, like analysts are saying that it's all a hoax, that it's not actually happening. And like they bring on like a photo expert or something, a photojournalist, and they start asking him to disprove, the picture of this alien on this table. And, like they pretty much go out of their ways to just try to like disprove, this alien invasion as it's actively happening and as people are actively being turned into like mushroom people. And it's like it's intercut with like throughout the manga, it's intercut with sections where you see like there's like little stories. I don't know if they're actual like little folklore things or if they're just like things that Shirakawa Marina just came up with for the manga. But there's one about like a man in a yellow hat or whatever who is on like the edge of this well, and then he like drops into the well and mushrooms sprout from the well or whatever. And then there's like the story of this old, or not old, but there's like the story of these monks that, don't respect being a monk, don't respect their duties as a monk, and they go out and get drunk and do all these other things that they aren't supposed to do. And when they die, like mushrooms sprout from their bodies, and there's all manner of different stories, like little excerpts and whatnot, like folk stories or whatever, like wives' tales, and there's like a lot of random things like that throughout this series. And then it's like kind of intercut with the main story of the kid Aoki and his teacher. And as it goes on, you see it really spread throughout this whole city, throughout Tokyo and whatnot, and I think it just ultimately spreads throughout like all of Japan by the end of it. But yeah, this was a fun read. You know, I actually had a pretty decent time with it. I don't think this wasn't my favorite of the collection of the first five Smudge volumes that came out from all these different creators. But one thing that is cool is at the end of all of these, there's like these little sections where you learn about the creator of the manga. You know, right here, like you can just read this whole article, and every one of these has them, like the article at the end, where like it shows you like all the different works that these creators had done. So I think that's something that's really special and really cool that this imprint is doing. All right, so next up we've got Mansect by Koga Shinichi. And so I like a lot of older series. I like a lot of older artwork and a lot of older manga. And I know there's this whole thing going on right now with people dogging on older anime series and older manga series and whatnot. And I'm not for that. I think that is extremely disappointing that anybody would do that, given that a lot of the stuff that people like and enjoy now was, for the most part, inspired by these older creators. You know, they inspired the newer generation of creators who then inspired whatever is essentially the current generation now of creators. You know, it's like this whole ecosystem or whatever of creators. This is, to me, these are series that, inspired people like Junji Ito and Naoki Urasawa. And that's kind of what this video is too, is like showing love to all these older series. This is pretty much following this dude named Hideo, who is like kind of an oddball. Like his mom, I think, passed away or whatever, and like this neighbor lady is trying to come over to check up on him. And like he collects bugs and whatnot. He really likes bugs, and he's like, the whole house that he has that his mom left him is just covered in bugs. And somehow at one point in time, like he even starts to turn into a bug. Like he starts to turn into like a butterfly or something. Like he gets pulled into like this cocoon, and that's him right there on the cover. Like it starts getting like pulled into like this cocoon, and he evolves into this creature that I thought it might have been on here, but he evolves into this creature that looks like the creature from the Black Lagoon, and I don't in any way, shape, or form think that is a coincidence. That is definitely on purpose. Like the creator Koga Shinichi definitely meant for that to be the case. It was definitely inspired by that to some extent. And yeah, we follow Hideo as he kind of goes on this sort of like, I don't want to call it a rampage, but he does end up, killing people, and he gets attacked at one point in time. Well, he's become this weird creature. He gets attacked by a dog, and one of his appendages is ripped off by the dog, and the appendage kind of like takes on a life of its own, and it kind of goes off on its own journey and is picked up by this kid named Shoal, who is like kind of like hunched back, and his mom is like really nasty to him and like wants him, like he's like demanding that he get like good grades or whatever. And he ends up becoming like really withered and whatnot, becomes kind of like mummified. And we meet this other kid as well later on whose dad was also mummified. So like pretty much anybody that comes into contact with Hideo, or like, the hand or whatever that he lost, they become mummified, and it starts to become kind of like a thing in this world where, people that come into contact with him, become mummified. And like his dad became mummified. Shoal, not Hideo. Shoal's dad became mummified, and Shoal also ends up, becoming kind of like mummified. And at one point in time, like the two of them merge into like this wild tree. First, the dad was like kind of like a tree kind of a thing, but then like his son joins him, and the two of them become like an even bigger tree. And then Sho's mom comes and burns the whole tree down, like burns down the forest and burns herself with it, like kills herself and kills her husband or ex-husband or whatever, or estranged husband and son. And that part was absolutely bonkers. And then there's like this little girl too who I think her parents passed away or something like that. I can't remember what the context was there, but somebody's taking care of her. She's got like a legal guardian or whatever, and there's this lady who's like a nurse and a legal guardian, and the nurse go into the woods after the girl because she has a friend or whatever in the woods, and it's Hideo, but he's kind of like in his weird form. He's kind of like, I think, in this form. He's like in like this really weird form, and when they go to get her, the caretaker lady, I think, ends up being able to take the girl away, and the nurse lady is eaten by Hideo, and after he eats her, like, he reverts back to being kind of like a human being, and he is taken to the hospital. And when he's at the hospital, he meets like this young girl that reminds him of a girl that he liked when he was a lot younger. I think it was this girl that his mom was trying to get him to marry, but he was just so like awkward and weird and whatnot that he just didn't go for it. And then later on, he meets this girl at this hospital, and he thinks that like she's the one, and like he's got to whisk her away, and he tries to do that. He tries to like whisk her away into the woods, and the girl's mom comes and intervenes, and Hideo like damn near bludgeons this woman to death with a bat, or not a bat, but like a piece of wood. Like damn near tries to bludgeon her to death. Yeah, he ends up running away, and he starts to revert, little by little, starts to revert and become like a child and whatnot. And I won't, go too far into it. I just thought it was like kind of funny because it reminded me of like Benjamin Button, where he's like kind of aging in reverse. And yeah, I actually really like this one a lot. This one, I think I like this a little more than UFO Mushroom Invasion, but I also don't think this was my favorite. I think my favorite was one of the last two that I'm going to talk about, which are like two collections of stories. I think one of those two was potentially my favorite, but yeah, these are all, I think, a pretty fun, pretty entertaining read. All right, next up we've got Her Frankenstein. This is by Kawashima Norikazu. So this is a series that I picked up. I picked this up like, I think last year, or was it the year before last year? But I think this is in my video from last year where I said I might talk about this at some point in time. Or I think I remember saying that like I would maybe talk about it in like a Halloween video or something. And obviously it's past, the opportunity for me to talk about it in a Halloween video, but I'm still going to talk about it. Her Frankenstein pretty much follows this kid, or this grown man, I should say, named Tetsuo. Tetsuo is someone who really looks up to women. He had this boss, that like he worshipped, pretty much like worshipped the ground that she walked upon. And then, when he was a kid, there was this girl named Kiriko that he also, became kind of enamored with. And then before her, it was his mother, to whom he felt a strong emotional connection. So the story pretty much follows Tetsuo as he is, I guess, driving home or whatever. And in the back seat of his car, he sees a girl pretty much dressed like this, just kind of sitting there, like blood pouring down her face. And he turns around and she isn't there. And then he just starts to kind of like see her everywhere that he goes. And it gets to the point where like he goes to see his doctor, and the doctor tells him, I think it's like a psychiatrist or whatever, tells him to like kind of think back, to open up his mind and think back and, try to find, where he knows her from. How does he know this person? Who was she to his past? And then, it kind of hits him who she is, and he remembers that it's this girl from when he was a kid named Kiriko, and Kiriko was like the richest, like her parents, her father or whatever was like super duper rich, and she lived like on this big house like that overlooked like the sea or whatever, the ocean, the beach. And one day while out and about, he sees her, Kiriko, and her maid near the water or whatever, and I guess like the maid ends up carrying her, back to the house, because Kiriko was like physically weak. She was born physically weak, I guess like a weak immune system and whatnot, and she is like really frail. And I think the maid ends up taking her back or carrying her back. I forget what the context is, but long story short, she forgets her cane. So Tetsuo wants to be like a good little boy and, wants to go return the cane to Kiriko. And then when he goes up to her place to return the cane to her, there's these boys there, and like they bully him and they beat the hell out of him. Meanwhile, Kiriko is looking on from the window and says, "That's what you get," or something like that. And I feel like that right there really speaks to her character and, how she's going to end up acting later on. And then like Tetsuo's home life, isn't too great either. Like his dad is really abusive towards him, I guess, if you will, because he wants his son to be like a man. He wants him to be manly, and Tetsuo really isn't manly. He's kind of a pushover, and his dad is ashamed of him. And they have a new baby, and the mom, Tetsuo's mom, starts to pay attention to this new baby, and out of jealousy, he pinches the baby's cheek, and his father, sees him pinch the baby's cheek and kind of tells him that he is disappointed in him, like pretty much like as a man and as a son and whatnot. And so Tetsuo just like goes to Kiriko's house and tries to, befriend her and gives her back her cane, and she invites him in to watch Frankenstein with her, and he goes home and makes a Frankenstein mask because she was telling him that she likes Frankenstein, and she respects Frankenstein because nobody tells him no. He's strong, he's imposing, he can beat anybody up, he can hurt anybody that he wants, and she likes that, being that she's weak and she, is frail and whatnot and falls easily. She feels an attachment to Frankenstein, who is the strong sort of a figure that gives her hope, even though it's like not like a good kind of hope. It's like a mean-spirited kind of hope, as you learn through reading the series, because like once Tetsuo makes his Frankenstein mask, she wants him to go and like hurt kids and whatnot and like beat them up if he catches them. Instead, he just wants to scare them because he thinks they're just having fun. But Kiriko actually wants him to physically harm children that he catches. And at one point in time, the bully that beat him up in front of Kiriko's window, she gets him down to like this beach area and gives Tetsuo her cane. And Tetsuo donning the Frankenstein mask tells Tetsuo to beat up the bully, and she tells the bully like that he can't defend himself in any way, shape, or form because his dad, works for her dad. So she's going to tell her dad, to fire his dad for whatever reason, saying, I think that like he touched her, beat her up or something, or hurt her. And so she's pretty much like threatening, his dad's livelihood and pretty much the whole family's livelihood. And so Tetsuo just begins to wail on this kid with a cane, and the kid takes off, running or whatever. And they kind of go like this back and forth for a little bit, with Tetsuo just kind of like chasing around kids and like wearing the mask. And eventually Kiriko kind of just like outgrows the whole Frankenstein thing. Like she meets a boy or whatever, and she no longer needs this Frankenstein thing. Meanwhile, Tetsuo is kind of like tied his whole identity to Frankenstein, because when he is Frankenstein, it's the only time that he feels strong. And he feels throughout his life, first he feels betrayed by his mother, because she has a baby and she pays attention to the baby, and like his mother was his anchor, but then that gets taken away, and then Kiriko becomes his anchor, and then that also gets taken away. And then he has this boss that is like another strong woman in his life, and then that gets taken away because she dies. Once all of these things get taken away from him, as an adult, I can't remember if he finds the old Frankenstein mask or if he buys one or what it was, what the situation was, but pretty much like he puts on a Frankenstein mask and tries to relive his childhood with Kiriko, and something in him just like snaps, and he ends up trying to like kidnap this little girl. And he's so far gone at this point in time that like he feels like people are egging him on as he's running off with his child. But in reality, because you see like the reality of the situation, and then you also see like his kind of like delusion or whatever, where like people are cheering him on, and then the reality is like people are like, hey, grab that, get that man, he's kidnapping this child or whatever. I thought that was really cool, the way that plays out. And it's like, I felt bad for him, you know, because he is just this dude that never really had a chance from when he was a child. He never really stood a chance. And it kind of reminded me of like Rorschach, you know, where like Rorschach sees his mask as his face, and when the mask gets ripped off, he says, "My face, give me back my face." That's kind of like with Tetsuo in this series, you know, when he has the mask, he feels, you know, strong, feels like somebody that is capable. And I found it personally to be really just sad. Sad in, you know, many ways that the word sad can be used. You know, sad as in depressing, and sad as in, you know, like you just go like, wow, that's sad. You know what I mean? So it's like the different ways of the different connotations, I guess, if you will, of the word sad. But yeah, this is a really good read. And, you know, I just kind of like latched on to different things and tried to find what I assumed is what Kawashima Norikazu was going for with this one, and that's kind of what I got from it. Is just this guy who, you know, looks at different strong women as anchors for him, and, you know, once all those anchors are gone, and then like his personal life, his wife is really nasty to him and whatnot. Like he can't stand her. Like he hates his wife and whatnot. And he had these other anchors that were women that, you know, made him feel strong despite the world essentially making him feel weak. All right, so next up we've got Face Meat by Bonten Taro. So this collection was a lot of fun. I think may have been my favorite collection of the series. So this one's an actual collection. There are 14 series collected in this volume. I'm going to talk about 5 of them for this video. But Bonten Taro, I feel like, had a pretty interesting life, where he was in his youth a kamikaze pilot, where he was essentially supposed to die, I guess, if you will. But luckily he, you know, ended up not sacrificing his life. He ended up going on to write like over 250 short stories and whatnot. And like I said, 14 of them are collected in this collection, and they are all absolutely wild. They all range from different levels of just absolute chaos. So one of the first ones of this collection is one called Head. And this one is about a guy who is kind of like a Western, I guess, if you will. Because each one in this collection is like supposed to be something different. Like the first one's like painted as like horror Western, and then there's some samurai ones and whatnot, and like more, I guess, modern to the time. But yeah, pretty much the one that I think it's like the first one too, it's called Head, and it is about this guy whose wife dies, and she doesn't want him to remarry, but he ends up, you know, remarrying after she passes away, and the woman that he marries kind of looks just like her. So what ends up happening is like she comes up out of the grave and takes the head of the woman that he had married after her, like brutally murders her and takes her head. And these are all just like really short stories, and that one's like, that's like the whole story right there. Yeah, that was like the first one right off the bat, and I was like, holy hell. I was like, damn, that was extremely brutal. Another one that I really liked, that I feel like would have done really well as its own standalone series, is The Man-Eating Demon. And so this one opens with this woman and like her toddler or whatever. Like this is like feudal, you know, Japan sort of a setting, and she's got like a baby strapped to her, like to the back, and she's told not to go near this waterfall because there is a demon that lurks near the waterfall after hours or whatever. But she goes to the waterfall and takes on this demon, and, you know, like narrowly escapes with her life. And when she gets back to this village or whatever, all that remains of her baby, I think it's its lower half, like the rest of the baby's like completely gone. It was destroyed. Later on, this monk comes into the fold, and he ends up taking out the demon. He sits by this fire and the demon approaches the fire, and when the demon approaches, the monk just with one single cut, takes out the demon, just essentially kills it. And I really appreciated Bonten Taro's ability to do a lot of like different kinds of stories, because they're all unique in some way or another. Every one of the stories in this collection is kind of its own little world, and the fact that he did over like 250 stories is just mind-blowing to me. It's really wild, and I love creativity like that. I love that creators can do things like that and just like make tons and tons of different worlds. I think that's something that is incredible. And then the next one is titled after the volume, or the volume was titled after the story or whatever. Face Meat is pretty much a story that follows this guy who is a grave robber, and he uses the faces that he steals, like he steals heads or whatever from graves, and he uses the faces like kind of like a leather face sort of a situation, but he uses the faces to swap out, like he puts the faces on and kind of like embodies these different people and whatnot. And there's this husband and wife that see him on television, because he's seen, like he ends up on television as like the man with 1,000 faces or whatever, like this variety show, and they go, that's the grave robber, right? Who's been desecrating all of these graves, and they keep finding these graves with these headless bodies. So the husband goes off, I guess to like go to the police station or whatever to let them know that he's discovered who the killer is. And then later on, the husband comes back to the house, and he's got like bandages like just all over his head, and the wife is like kind of confused by it, and he ends up like taking off the bandages and reveals himself to be the grave robber, and then he kills the wife and takes her head as well. And I don't know, man, I just thought it was a lot of fun. So that's another one from the collection that I really enjoyed. The next story that I liked from this collection is one called Death's Embrace. So this one I think kind of ties into like the 60s and 70s, and I didn't grow up in Japan and I don't really know much about the era, the 60s and 70s in Japan, but this story, in my opinion, kind of has to do with like that flower child, sort of 60s, 70s, love, not war, sort of a thing. People were like just doing drugs and whatnot. I don't know how it was in Japan in that era. I don't know if it was like that or not, but like pretty much post-war, and I think that's kind of what it has to do with this story, because this follows these two characters that take drugs and whatnot and just like fool around a lot and just like have a lot of sex, and they end up going on like this really weird sort of like acid trip into like war and whatnot. And like one moment they're taking drugs, and then the next they pretty much are transported to like this hellscape sort of like war zone and whatnot, and then from there, like I guess like it fries their brains or whatever drugs they're on, like fry their brains and like make them feel like they are in this sort of like war zone, like a real war zone, like bombs going off and soldiers killing like civilians and other soldiers and whatnot. And from there, I guess some time has passed, and the girl ends up being pregnant, and she gives birth to like a drug baby, and felt real. It's something that has happened. Drug babies are born to mothers who are addicts, unfortunately, but it's a real thing. And having been written back whenever it was written, it feels legit. This is something like a commentary on real world sort of events and whatnot, and it speaks, I think, generationally to a really specific period in history. So that's kind of why I like that story, and also kind of reminded me of Daisuke Igarashi's Witches, which I love that collection, and that's kind of what it made me think of. So that's another reason that I chose that for one of my top 5 of the collection. Alright, so the last one from this collection that I enjoyed is The Messenger of Death. So pretty much what this one does is this follows these two, like, I guess like mobster or yakuza buddies or whatever, and one of the buddies is telling the other one that like he's not man enough to, I guess, to like do something or whatever, and the buddy's like, I'll show you who's man enough, and like he clubs his friend to death, and Death ends up rolling up with a carriage and has like a rake instead of having like a scythe. Death has a rake, and like it bludgeons, or at least like hits the one buddy who was still alive with the rake, and it takes both of them to hell. And when they're in hell, they see all manner of tortures, like bodies roasting over a spit. They see bodies on a wheel, being stretched or whatever. They bear witness to all sorts of like extremely graphic tortures and whatnot, and they end up waking up, and it's the next morning, and it kind of feels like what they saw was potentially like a warning. If they keep living these dangerous lives, they keep doing like their yakuza mobster things, they're gonna end up roasting in the pit of hell and being the ones on the spit, being the ones on the torture rack, being stretched in perpetuity and whatnot. So I thought that was a pretty good closer, and definitely a great closer. If anything, 2 was essentially a roller coaster, just absolutely bananas collection of stories. So My Gorilla Family, written and drawn by Iijima Ichiro, much like Face Meat, is 14 collected stories. This is a more recent release, but this one's also just absolutely unhinged. This collection was a lot of fun too. This title story, like, I didn't really care for that much. My Gorilla Family, the title story, I wasn't like a huge fan of it, but I did like a lot of the stories in this thing. Some of them are really wild. Like the story back here is pretty wild. This wasn't one of my favorites, one of my 5 favorites, but it was pretty entertaining and definitely gory as all hell. I'll let you all discover that one for yourselves if you haven't read the collection yet. My first favorite, I think, is the opening story of the collection, which is Spider Horror. In this one, this woman, for whatever reason, decides that she wants to be extremely cruel and tries to set a spider on fire. And after she does this thing, a bunch of spiders like just start crawling inside of her body. And at one point in time, her and the guy that she's with, I don't know if he's like her boyfriend or just like a guy that she messes around with or whatever, these spiders end up just like bursting out of her, like out of every orifice of her body. Like they just like burst out of every part of her, and like out of her mouth and whatnot, in her body and whatnot. They burst through her boobs, like in her stomach and whatnot. It's super random, but like, yeah, they burst out of like all over her, and it's just pretty much like saying, leave nature alone. I don't know that it's actually saying that. I think it's just meant to be like a creepy story or whatever. But that one was like pretty brutal, and it's like right off the bat. I think it was like the first story, and yeah, like you just see this woman like explode with spiders just like crawling out of like every inch of her body, and it reminded me of the film Arachnophobia. All right, so the next one is called Woman Planet. And the reason that I picked this is that it really reminded me of one of my favorite shows ever, which is a show called Futurama. And there's this episode of Futurama where like the Planet Express crew goes to this, they go to this planet that's like an Amazonian sort of a planet, and there's like these huge, like just absolutely huge women or whatever, and they take all the men aboard and make them like their sex slaves. And there's this whole chant that like anybody that watched the show, that's my age or whatever, will know, and it's like death by snoo snoo. And that's kind of what it made me think of. Like Woman Planet made me think of that, only in this story they're like sex bots instead of like these Amazonian gigantic women or whatever. And in Futurama, like the men die by death by snoo snoo. It's like this form of punishment, that, or punishment they're subjected to or whatever in Futurama, that they pretty much have sex until like their pelvises are destroyed, broken, whatever. And in Woman Planet, these guys, these astronauts, land on this they land on this planet, and there's like a bunch of women on the planet, and the guys, start having sex with these women, and little by little, or one by one rather, the men start to die. The women crush the men because they're like these sex bots, and like they have like this insatiable appetite for sex, but they also have this strength that I guess went unmeasured when they were created or whatever, or they malfunctioned. And yeah, any man that, tries to have sex with the sex bots is crushed by their incredible strength. So, yeah. So another one that I really liked is one called Solitary Confinement. So this one is about this dude. This one feels like, I like this one a lot because it felt like it could have been an episode of The Twilight Zone. Like, kind of reminded me of like the episode where, like, I can't remember if it was like the first episode of The Twilight Zone, where this dude's in like this city or whatever, and like it's abandoned, and that's kind of what it made me think of a little bit. But in this, it's kind of like, even reminds me of like Westworld. There is this guy who's sitting at a bar, and he just like freaks out and starts killing the other patrons and whatnot in the bar. And then it kind of turns out that the patrons are all robots, and he's on this planet where he's the only person, the only living human being on the planet, and these aliens in this particular story have taken over Earth and are sending certain people off to live in like a sort of solitary confinement, and he's one of these people that, goes off to live in a solitary confinement. And they're kind of disappointed in him because they gave him this world to do, to just like live and do whatever, and he doesn't want that. He wants to, be free and be just like a regular human being or whatever. But that's kind of over because of the alien invasion, and that's definitely a thing with Ijima Ichiro. I'd say there's a lot of like alien stuff in his stories, and then like all the women have like huge boobs. Like all the women in these collections all just have like these huge boobs, and then there's also like a lot of aliens and whatnot. So I think that was just like in general a thing with the stories, because one of the next ones I'm going to talk about also features aliens, and that is a story called A Unique Palette. And so that one kind of reminded me, like the end of it kind of reminded me of the first Faces of Death movie. There's a scene that involves a monkey and brains, but this story features something like that at the end. But A Unique Palette, pretty much these aliens have already taken over Earth, and there's this chef who's like a gourmet chef, and any like weird thing that they want to eat, he makes it for them. They just keep asking for like these really strange dishes or whatever, and ultimately they want to eat, I guess, his son's brains or whatever. And he ends up doing it. He ends up, serving them up, his own kid, because, he's got no choice. He has to do what they want. And he even, like, I think he tells his wife, like, we can just have another or whatever. Kind of reminded me of Promised Neverland, because I know that's kind of like a thing too with Promised Neverland, where like the kids are on like these cattle ranches, and the kids are cattle for the aliens, and that's kind of like what this made me think of. Wouldn't be surprised if this story is what inspired part of Promised Neverland. So I saved what is essentially one of the wildest stories for last in this collection, and that is one called Birth of the Plant People. And yeah, this was something else. This one was absolutely insane. So there are what are assumed to be these murders where there's this tree, and every so often there will be like this really weird looking sort of a child at the base of this tree with its head split open, and nobody's really understanding what's going on, and they think it's like a serial killer that's like murdering these like weird sort of like creatures. Nobody knows what's going on, and it's like they're thinking that like somebody's bringing these things here to the base of this tree and murdering them there. And then this guy, I think, sees one of them fall out of the tree and smash its head and pretty much die. And he kind of starts to wonder, why did this kid just fall out of this tree? This weird child, freak looking thing, Elven looking thing. And he sees that there are like men going up to this, I guess, opening in the tree, and they're essentially making love to this opening of the tree. For whatever reason, they are sexually attracted to this tree, and they have sex. And they have sex with the tree, and these babies are born of these dudes making love, making sweet, sweet love to the tree. And I mean, I don't know how to talk about the story. Like, it's so ridiculous, dude. And this dude climbs up and sees that there's just like tens of, you know, these weird freak baby alien, you know, elven things hanging from the tree. And it was the most like, just like, how the hell do you just come up with this, you know, stories? And I don't know, dude. I applaud it. You know, I have nothing but praise to laud at this dude. Because like, I personally don't think I could have ever come up with anything that just ridiculous. But these creators were something else, and like, I'm not hating on it. I thought it was hilarious. It was just so random, dude, and I love the imagination that it takes, you know, to come up with something like that, or to even come up with, like, you know, the 14 stories in this collection, or all the stories in all of these collections. And yeah, I had a great time going through all of these, and I want to talk about them one more time. We'll run them all back and just kind of give my final thoughts on them. So if you've stuck around this far, I definitely appreciate you for doing so. All right, so these are my final thoughts on these series. So I want to say that my favorite was probably going to be Face Meat. It's a UFO mushroom invasion. We pretty much follow this kid and his teacher as they, you know, navigate this mushroom invasion, these aliens or whatever. Kind of reminded me of, what was it, Town of Pigs. It reminded me of that a little bit. Next up, we got Man Sect. This one was really good too. We follow Hideo, who was like a man-child, and he goes on this, like, I don't want to call it like a killing spree, but you know, all the people that he interacts with, to some extent or another, become kind of like monsters too. Like, they get mummified and then become kind of monstrous, like the one dude and his dad who became a tree. Her Frankenstein, this one's really good. This is like, I think, like a pretty good like psychological sort of study of a man who never really felt like a man, I guess, if you will, like always felt emasculated or whatever. Face Meat, I'd say probably my favorite in the collection. This creator right here, Bontentaro, just absolutely knocked it out of the park. 14 stories, each one more insane than the last. And yeah, Face Meat from there was one of my favorite stories. The one with the monk was really good. Just a lot of different stories in there are absolutely solid. And then this one that we just talked about right here, My Gorilla Family. This is another one. Big boobs, aliens, spiders bursting out of women's boobs. I mean, what more could you want? But yeah, these are the 5 volumes that I read for this video. Support Smudge. Go out and buy these if they're still available. I don't know if they're still available or not, but if they are, definitely go out there and support them. Support indie creators or indie publishers, because I don't think Smudge is like a huge publisher. So definitely go out there and support them, because I think they definitely deserve it, so they can keep publishing these older series, you know, and we get more classic goodness that we can all enjoy. So that's it for me. I hope that you enjoyed our time together. I know it's been a long time since my last video. I really don't know how often I'm going to be dropping videos on this channel going forward. I do have other projects that I want to get going. So hopefully, I'll have some more stuff to drop before the end of the year. But that's pretty much all I got for you. Thank you so much for hanging out with me. It means the absolute world that you took time out of your day to spend it with me. You could have been doing anything else with your day, but you spent about an hour of it here hanging out and talking about manga. So I definitely appreciate you for it. Take care of yourselves until next time that we meet